So in this exciting episode of Metaphor Analysis, we're looking at stuck in a pit. Now this is a very, very common type of metaphor. Essentially, it's a typical container metaphor, and container metaphors is a big part of the level 1 work. We cover this usually on the day 2 of the training. Those who've done the training will be well aware that immediately this is going to be all about their family, and there's complicated reasons as to why that's so. I'm not going to go into that in any of these videos. You'd have to come on the training for that. There's a link below, of course. Click the like button as well. So here's what we got. Stuck in a pit. The person is standing at the bottom of it. It's slightly sloped. It's described like an inverse mountain. It's raining. It's raining obviously in the air and into the pit as well. As a result, water is running down the sides. There's a flat, wet wall behind them. They're standing in ankle-deep mud and water. There's a bridge over the top which people can pass over. And there's all sorts of balloons, fairy dust and happy shit on the bridge. And there's a half moon up in the sky, but it's not described as nighttime, just a half moon. So that's the metaphor. This now tells us everything we need to know about that person's personal history, their domestic environment in which they grew up. It's not going to be possible for me to do everything in just a 10-minute video. So the comment section below, I expect is going to get quite busy with all the things I haven't mentioned. One of the problems about looking at particular metaphors is it's very hard to immediately come up with stuff straight away that covers all bases, because metaphors are so information dense. It's almost like you have to put it out to a committee of people to get all the different angles. And in the other videos, some of the comments people have made, it's that kind of elusive obvious. I look at them and think, oh my God, I completely missed that. I wasn't even thinking in those lines. But somebody else, of course, has their own particular biases. So they immediately see it from that bias, whereas I will see it from my own particular bias. So this is why it can be very interesting to get multiple views on any particular metaphor, because so many people have different elements to it. Here's the weird part, of course. If you put all of those things to the person who experiences the metaphor, even if those statements and idiomatic analysis are contradictory, they will still be correct. Metaphors are incredibly information-dense portions of experience, where multiple things can actually contradict each other, but they're encoded in a coherent manner as symbols, and the symbols then create the metaphor. So there's so much in these things, it is quite remarkable. In the training, when we do the dream work module, which is really the introductory to dream work on the level 2, there's been 2 particular dreams I have been using as the examples for this for nearly 10 years. And every single time I present these dreams to the group, people are still coming up with new stuff that no one's ever said before and I'd never considered. I find it incredible that after all of these presentations that I've done of these particular 2 dreams to groups of people, there is still new information emerging, which tells me the information density of these things is extraordinary. So as I miss things, note them down, stick them in the comment section. It's always interesting to see what other people have got. Now, you might hear all sorts of noises going on. I'm on the world's creakiest chair, and we have a bit of a storm. I live on the coast here, and we've got a bit of a storm today, so it's pretty windy and noisy up there, and the roof keeps moving rather disturbingly. Right, let's see what we got. So they're standing in ankle-deep mud and water. There's water flowing down the sides. It's raining. That's about the atmosphere. There's a bridge over the top with balloons and happy shit. There's a half moon. There's a wet wall, flat wall behind them. And essentially the person they can't get out. The sides here are covered in rocks and wet moss. So what we know immediately here is this is shame avoidance. And the reason we know that is the ankle-deep mud and water. Just to give you a context here, I tend to do shame on the level 3 work, but I also will incorporate this in masterclasses. But just to give you a context of the guy's family background, shame avoidance is a very, very powerful thing in all human culture, and possibly other animals too, I suspect. Anyone that's got a dog will be familiar with dogs' experience and displays of shame. People will do anything to avoid shame. Imagine I'm walking across town to meet my wife for dinner in a restaurant, for example. And on the way there, in my best, finest finery, I fall into the sewer, and I'm in the sewer up to here. Now, I'm pretty much in the shit here. However, at this moment in time, there's no shame experienced. This at the moment is not shame. I climb out of the sewer and now continue my journey across town, maybe catch a bus. I now might feel shame of my condition. I might feel the need to justify it and explain it to everyone because I'm so ashamed of the state that I'm in. So what we end up with is people will, in order to avoid shame, they don't change their behavior. And here is a problem. Because socially, we really like the notion of shaming wrongdoers. And shaming has been used in varying forms throughout the ages across all human cultures as a way of, it's a disincentive for people to transgress. But does shaming people make them change? I have a suspicion that shame and guilt as well are two emotions that actually prevent people from changing. Shame is one of the worst experiences people can feel. It's one of the worst emotional states people can get into, and they'll do anything to avoid it, including remaining in the sewer rather than reveal their condition. This is why people maintain a lie. People will build a lie of themselves. Nothing big, nothing grandiose. Each little lie that gets told adds to the mass of deception that we create about ourselves. And as time goes on, we end up creating this pseudo-identity, this persona, that is so far removed from the truth. But now to admit the truth would be basically to confess that we've done so much lying over the years or misled people to who we really are as our identity. And so people will continue the lie rather than risk being shamed. There's something quite liberating about these confessionals that people do because you don't have to pretend anymore. Life is so much easier that way. And yet, what I'll see, especially out of the alphabet therapy type people who have created a persona of success, I don't feel fine because that's, what is it, fucked up, insecure, neurotic and emotional. No, I'm great. And they say it with such gusto, I just think, what are you trying to prove? And who are you trying to prove it to? I mean, come on, people, be honest here. You're not allowed to say you're okay, you're doing fine. You're not allowed to do that. You have to constantly portray, or these people do, have to constantly portray that they are something that they're very clearly not. And I've watched lots of people over the years, their life goes down, 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 their relationships break down, their income drops, they often end up unemployed, they end up bankrupt, basically, life becomes terrible for them, and they still maintain the illusion and maintain the lie, because they would rather their life goes down the pan than be honest. Because being honest now means they have to admit they've lied, and that potentially brings shame. That's what we've got going on here. So now we have a person who's in a situation, and for them, what we're aware of, and this is a level 6 element, time is running out. We know time is running out because this is, by implication of what they've described, is going to be filling up. And that potentially could be their liberation, and it will be the end of them. What I'm going to argue is it's both. It will be both their liberation and the end of them, because essentially it gets them out of the hole that they're currently in, assuming they go up there. The death of that person is probably no bad thing, to be honest. This is the persona they've got within the context of their family, and this is the thing they've never grown out of. So that's just the overall structure, and that probably won't make sense to anyone that's not done the training. Now, the bridge that goes over the top here. Now, we talk about building bridges. This is something that goes right over his head. It means people can walk over him. He's a walkover. He walks over. And people are quite happy about that. By him describing it as fairy dust, balloons, and happy shit, it doesn't sound like he's very happy about that. But potentially he thinks other people are. So he's the guy that's got depth. He's the guy that's at the bottom of this. He's the guy that's in this deep. He's on his own. He's isolated. He's down. He's at rock bottom. He's all those classic container type idioms for a pit. And those are the people who are very much at the surface, and are able just to just go over the whole thing without getting involved, without getting into it with him. It's almost like there's a depth separation between him and those that can just pass over the top. So it's not really a concern to them. The balloons and happy shit just suggests to me more about mood of the people that would travel over, and also the function of the bridge. Partly as well, the bridge is to cover up or cover over the absence of support that anyone would have otherwise going over here. So this bridge is the support those people have. And at the moment, this is not accessible to him. The half moon, not too sure actually what that's about. I can't off the top of my head, think of any idioms about the moon at all. Generally, there's a lot of association with moon and madness, but I don't know. This doesn't seem to ring true for me around there. That's more symbolic interpretation rather than idiomatic analysis. What else we got? The rain. So we know is an atmosphere. He's getting wet. He is wet. And so within his family, I don't know if being wet is a thing that is used outside of the UK. Perhaps you could advise me on that one. But generally, when people are wet, it's because we say they're emotionally weak. They're a little bit, they tend to be miserable on things. So we say they're a bit wet. I'm guessing that comes from tears. However, so we know he's wet. Whether that means, I know this has come from America, so I'm not entirely sure if that's a common use of idiom over there as well. And there's certainly all around him things are flowing. I don't know if that works actually. I can't think of anything there. So I think that's all I've got. Obviously, this guy's got a lot of growing up to do. But there's a consequence. Think about what is the consequence of this guy growing up. There's a lot of growing up. This is about a 50-foot pit. He described it as a lot of growing up to do. But what does that now do to other people? What is the effect that's going to have? Now, you have to bear in mind, he may well, if we analyze this content-wise with him, he may well say this is family members passing over. But because that's outside of the container, although it's an inherent part of the container, they're on the outside of it. This is other people. What is the consequence his growing up will have on other people? It's going to break the bridge that's been built. And people don't like burning bridges or breaking bridges. I spent a career doing that when I worked in the NHS, and it's not a good plan. I've often regretted it. Anyway, so don't burn your bridges, don't break your bridges, don't bring them down. However, that's going to be the consequence of him growing up. So now what we can say is that his lack of growing up, his emotional immaturity, his wetness, is what actually is doing a favor to those people. So his staying wet, his staying small, his staying deep, him being down, him having low status, you get the elevation part, right, is actually serving a function for other people. If we look at the positive intentions we can put into things, we can see the positive intention there. There's loads more. I'm going to pass this one over to you guys because I just know, looking at what people are writing on the other videos, I'm so impressed. So over to you. What else have you got? Click the like button.